And I'm going to say, welcome everybody. My name is Jim Snyder. I am the Director of Community Engagement here at Quality Matters. And I'm very excited that this is one of our series of partnership webinars that we do with different various partners that work with Quality Matters. And this one is titled Building Bridges, Integrating Quality Matter Standards, UDL, and K-12 Accessibility Practices. We go to the next slide. I want to just quickly introduce our presenters from Quality Matters. Pam Shaw, the Director of K-12 Quality Assurance. From CAST, Christine Fox, Chief Growth and Innovation Officer. And then from North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, we have Jennifer Nobles, Director of Curriculum, and Darlene Schaefer, the instructional designer there. So welcome everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to Pam and let her take it away from here. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Jim. So I'm going to start out talking about what accessibility means in the context of the Quality Matters K-12 rubric. So it is encompassed in General Standard 8, which is titled Accessibility and Usability. You can see the statement here, the course design reflects a commitment to accessibility and usability. So there are 8 general standards in the QM K-12 rubric with 48 specific review standards that are used to evaluate the design of elementary, middle, and high school online and digital courses. Students with varying needs come to us, and our courses need to accommodate them. This is true whether you build or buy your courses, so you can use that QM rubric in either situation. Remember, some students may be navigating via a screen reader or rely on other tools, so we'll hear a lot more about that later. But for this reason, recognizing those needs of our students, one of the general standards in the K-12 rubric is focused on accessibility. So General Standard 8, and that's the last standard in our general standards. We have 8 total. It's informed by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, known as WCAG, and the Universal Design for Learning Framework, UDL. However, those meeting those QM specific review standards regarding accessibility does not guarantee or imply that the specific accessibility regulations of any country are met. So it's not meant to be a comprehensive accessibility review, but it is certainly an important part of what we consider a quality online course. So the 8 essential specific review standards that are essential to be met in order for a course to be QM certified for high quality course design and an official review. Those specific review standards that are essential in General Standard 8 are 8.1T, which is navigation is intuitive, logical, consistent, and efficient. So what this comes down to is the course's navigation strategies facilitate ease of movement through the course and course activities. 8.2C, course design facilitates readability. This is looking at things like reducing visual crowding, distractions, as well as avoiding using color alone to convey meaning. And then to ensure that all learners can access course content, the course provides accessible text, images, and multimedia. So that's specific review standards 8.3C, 8.4C, and 8.5C. So we also have some very important standards within General Standard 8. Very important just means they contribute points toward the overall score of a QM review for certification, but they aren't considered essential like the others I just discussed. So 8.6C, that is multimedia, and a well-designed course facilitates ease of use. For example, flashing content's avoided, videos are broken into short segments, can be resized, audio quality is clear, and images are appropriately sized to fit on the page. And 8.7C, accessibility statements or vendor product accessibility templates called VPATs are easily found in the course site. So as you adopt these QM standards, there are some considerations about accessibility as you're looking to meet these standards in your courses. It really does require familiarity with accessibility principles such as universal design for learning, as well as that understanding of those accessibility requirements, including WCAG or any other, compliance type things that you might need to meet if you're not in the United States or, regulations. So you have to consider, does your staff have the know-how to implement course design that supports accessibility? If not, what training are you going to give them? For example, do they have the skills and knowledge to write alt text for images or provide closed captioning for videos? What about complex images such as graphs or math formulas? So those can be really hard to write alt text for, or come up with a way to communicate to that to people using screen readers. And these are really important considerations as you strive to apply UDL principles and accessibility to your courses and content. So now I'm going to hand it over to Christine Fox from CAST to really dig into this idea of universal design for learning.
Hi, everyone. I so excited to be here. Always have valued Quality Matters and the work of leaders that are in the virtual space, and so glad we're able to partner, especially because you find accessibility to be a priority. That is not always the case when we're engaging with different folks. Sometimes we're introducing the concept. So powerful that this is already a part of your world. If you're not familiar with CAST, CAST is a nonprofit out of the Boston area. Our tagline is "Until Learning Has No Limits," which I tell people that's one of the reasons I decided that I wanted to work here, because of the power and passion of the team. And we envision a world where all learning experiences in school, the workplace, and life are intentionally designed to elevate strengths and eliminate barriers so everyone has the opportunity to grow and thrive. So, those of you that are not familiar, CAST originally researched and published the Universal Design for Learning. You can go to the next slide. And with that, we have iterated the CAST UDL guidelines multiple times, including the 3.0 release in 2024. It seems like it just happened, but it was a year plus now, in the summer of 2024. So UDL is from CAST. UDL is supported by CAST. And not everyone knows that. Lots of folks know UDL, but they may or may not know CAST. So I like to give that bit of a plug. So the definition of UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. And when we think about learners and learner variability, I often use the example of all of us looking at our phones. And I'll get to this image in just a second. But if we took out our phones, you can see I have the lighter screen. Many of you might have the dark screen. Our font sizes are probably different. We may or may not use a screen reader. And so UDL is a framework. It is not a curriculum. It can be applied to any curriculum. We say from K to gray. So our focus is removing barriers to increase agency and access. In the image here on the screen, there are three individuals attempting to watch a soccer game. But there is a wood fence in front of that in front of the field in the first two images. So the tallest folks can see over the fence. Someone might be able to use a box to stand on and see over the fence, but others may not have that luxury. Then some folks might be able to stand on two boxes and be able to see the game. But in the last image, you can see there's an alternate version. There's a different fence. It's a chain link fence that you can see through, and then it doesn't matter how tall you are. So the Universal Design for Learning provides access and agency by removing barriers and empowering learners to decide what tools they need. And that is a different shift often for leaders in the field, for teachers that have been in their classroom telling everyone what and how to do things for so long. But in the flexibility of virtual environments, I think there's a lot more transparency and flexibility just at the core of those digital environments. But having said that, we still have to think about that learner agency. You can go to the next slide. So anticipating variability. I just mentioned some of the ways that all learners, regardless of an IEP or 504 plan, there is learner variability. Cognitive scientists have learned that people use the functions of their brain in varied ways. Human brains are as unique as human fingerprints. To address this variability, we need to design. We need to think about design. The goal of UDL and learner agency is to be purposeful and reflective, resourceful, authentic, strategic, and action oriented. So you can see here, so lots of folks, if you see the UDL guidelines, there's often the image of the brain because we're talking about different parts of the brain, the engagement, representation, action, and expression. And for those of us that have been in the classroom or taught online or have children of our own or have seen children at the playground, we know that they approach even, the swing set in different ways, and we need to provide those opportunities for learning similarly. So thank you. The base of UDL is accessibility. It comes first. Accessibility is a foundation of UDL. Before you can understand UDL, you must understand accessibility. And that's something that doesn't come totally natural for all folks that are in the field because UDL was around before digital learning was a standard, right? Before the level, even prior to COVID, the level of digital engagement has shifted, right? So you don't have to have technology to universally design, but for many students, technology may be part of their need or assistive technology as part of their IEP. And with UDL, we need to understand the accessibility of all of the digital content and tools. I share this. CAST has a product certification for companies. And when we first launched that product certification, it's UDL product certification. And part of the application was demonstrating their accessibility, sharing their VPAT that Pam just mentioned, in their accessibility policies. Interestingly, multiple applicants could show UDL alignment, but they could not demonstrate the accessibility of their digital tool or resource. So we were actually forced to split into two. So we have a stacked certification out. First, the baseline is demonstrating accessibility, and then the UDL side. A lot of companies will say, well, that's really hard. It's very expensive, and they're retrofitting, right? So we're really trying to be steadfast and hold on to the value of that accessibility mindset. So if you want to go to the next slide. Pam did a good job of doing a general intro of accessibility. This is a modified version from the federal definition, but here at CAS, we identify accessibility as when everyone, including individuals with disabilities or disabled, can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same opportunities in a timely and equivalent manner. And I'm going to talk about the accessibility of that slide because even I'm looking at the color and it's bothering me. So I will take responsibility. I don't know about that. But with that being said, I think a lot of times in education, that timely and equivalent manner is where the barrier comes in. We know that we need to provide, but often organizations, districts, schools may wait until they have that student that needs a certain thing, versus being proactive of providing accessibility options in the devices that the students already have, or training educators in advance. And then there is more of a barrier, especially around the time or equivalent manner. And so with that, we'll go to the next. I'm trying to watch my time. I don't know if I'm going too fast or too slow. Um, so with the framework itself, in UDL, those of you, actually, I've been talking a lot, so I'll just pause for a second. If you are familiar with the Universal Design for Learning, please feel free to share that in the chat. You can just put a thumbs up or say, yes, I'm familiar, because that'll also impact how much time I would spend on this particular slide. There's one thumb. Well, I see some thumbs flying. Okay. Great. So, a UDL workshop could be all day, it could be 2 days, but I'll just kind of share here quickly that the guidelines, the UDL guidelines, the CAS UDL guidelines have the principles at the top: engagement, representation, action, expression. And then for each of those principles, there's a direct guideline around it. For example, the arrow here is pointing to expression and communication. And then there are bullets underneath each with considerations. Now, this looks fairly simple and straightforward, and people could have thrown this together rapidly? Well, if you dig into the website, you can see copious resources. We have a whole lit review and research around each item, and I promise you that the each word on the guidelines was worked over meticulously to try to get to the clearest explanation and be the most understanding of learner variability. And so with that, you can leverage this as a guide when you're planning your lessons, when you're implementing lessons, when you're thinking about how students uh, respond or demonstrate their understanding, thinking about those different actions and expressions. And I'll put a few links in the chat after I'm done talking. And so with that, with the accessibility first mindset, I mentioned earlier organizations and companies talking about accessibility being expensive. But if you have accessibility first mindset, inclusive design principles baked in early, thinking about how will this work for diverse abilities, languages, and contexts, cross-functional collaboration, accessibility experts, educators, technologists, and end users are part of the planning process. And then finally, proactive feedback loops. Tools and strategies are evaluated for accessibility at every stage. And we've found in a lot of our work at CAST the lack of engagement with the end users. And I think that if you take something away today, it would be great to really think about how are you engaging with the end users as part of your planning process and part of your decision making. And speaking of collaboration, CAST is the grantee for the Center for Inclusive Technology and Education Systems. We refer to it here as CITES. It is a federally funded program through the Office of Special Education Programs at the Department of Ed. And yes, we have continued funding. With that, again, this could be a whole webinar or day-long workshop, but I wanted to highlight here specifically when thinking about the collaboration and for virtual programs, engaging with, the school of record or the district that you may be a part of or the State Department of Ed, depending on your structure. CITES has openly licensed resources. They're available to you at no cost. We encourage you to leverage them and reuse and remix as it makes sense for your work. And they're broken down into these 6 areas: leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, and assessment with family engagement across. We highlight a lot about inclusive practices, accessibility, AT in the infrastructure section specifically. There are resources around procurement and VPAT so that you understand what you can and should be looking at when you're thinking about making choices and selections. And we are working with cohorts of districts right now to participate and go through the framework and really kind of drive change so that their leadership, their ed tech plan includes accessibility and UDL, that they're including curriculum and content folks in their with their special ed as well as their IT. And I have been the co-project director for 3 years, so I'm passionate about this work. And again, it could be all day. So I just want to highlight this for you. And I think on the next slide, we have a few resources. So several years ago, we worked with multiple virtual school programs. You can see listed here, we have Garnet Valley School District in Pennsylvania, Mountain Heights Academy, Utah, North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, who's going to talk much more about their program than we did this research 2 to 3 years ago. Virtual Learning Academy Charter School in New Hampshire and Greater Commonwealth Virtual School in Massachusetts. So through that work and researching, interviewing, gathering data about those programs, we created through CITES specific resources around accessibility and AT for virtual programs. So the link is here. I'll also post it in the chat. We tried to make very short documents. And also part of them are specific tools aligning so you can use them for planning. And Pam, again, I'm not sure if I went too fast or too long. So,
I think it's perfect. Yeah, I'm
okay.
looking at the time. It looks great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Christine. And now we're going to pass it over to our friends at North Carolina Virtual Public School to talk about the practical everyday applications of accessibility and UDL at their program.
Well, thank you to Pam and Christine for setting the foundations of why accessibility and UDL are vitally important for our learners in the digital world today. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and introduce ourselves. So I'm Jennifer Nobles, the Director of Curriculum, and I have my colleague here.
Darlene Schaefer. I'm an instructional designer with North Carolina Virtual Public School.
And as mentioned, we're going to share a few sneak peeks into our courses at NCVPS and show how we are putting into practice UDL and accessibility when designing our courses. And I believe we've already seen some comments in the chat, and I know Darlene, when she's sharing some of her slides, she can probably address some of the questions and tools and resources and things like that that have been mentioned as she's sharing some of her slides. So we will have time for questions at the end as well. So we're excited to get started. So let's get started with who we are. We are a state-led supplemental program for students in grades 6 through 12 for the state of North Carolina. And we offer a comprehensive catalog of courses required for graduation, as well as additional electives. We currently have 100 certified courses with QM, with more on the horizon. We author and design our own courses with a team of licensed and trained teachers and instructional designers, contractors, and staff. And the focus of the webinar today, UDL and accessibility, are two of our guiding frameworks for our course design process. They're not our only ones, but they are two. So we're going to move forward to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it over to Darlene.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. So I'll tell you a little bit about like some of our founding philosophies with course design. So at NCVPS, we believe very strongly that accessibility is not a niche endeavor. Because we are a state agency, we have to follow the law, of course. And so there are laws and guidelines that support digital accessibility. But going back to what Dr. Fox was talking about it baking into its our practice, that's really what guides us. So like UDL and QM, which are a few of our guiding frameworks, we believe at NCVPS that accessible courses are really just better. They're more flexible for everyone. So while following these guidelines can ensure that students that are using assistive devices or relying on assistive technologies can access, again, an accessibility first mindset just makes everything better for everybody. So if a learner has closed caption, they can follow along if they're working in a busy classroom or if they're even working on the go. If there's high quality long description that's accompanying some of the infographics or some of the visuals, then even a sighted learner has that support to help them along with using that. So we follow these principles like accessibility and like universal design for learning because it really makes learning in the digital space better for everyone. So in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what we ask as we begin the course design process. So Dr. Fox included this in her presentation. This is a great question. How can this course work for students with diverse abilities, languages, and contexts? So who are our learners at NCVPS? Because we service students all across the state, they are a wide range. They live in different geographical environments. They have different backgrounds. They have access to different sorts of technologies. They're often working in different settings. They could be in a classroom environment, working alongside some of their other peers who might be on a headset taking the same course or maybe even a different course than the one they're taking at that given moment. They could be working at home independently by themselves. They could be working in a lab situation. Sometimes they might have a facilitator that can help them through some of the technology and tools, but more often than not, they may be working independently, especially if they're 6th to 12th grade students. They have that expectation of working a little bit more independently. So they come to us with this range of learning styles and variabilities that we try to illustrate in this AI generated image. And so with that in mind, we want to bake those practices of universal design for learning into our processes from the very start. So again, those are part of our foundations, along with the Quality Matters rubric. And not just General Standard 8, which of course leans toward accessibility and usability, but ensuring that alignment and that consistency throughout the course. Again, that's just going to make the experience stronger for everyone involved. All right, and I think in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what we apply.
Yes, and as Darlene mentioned, we're building courses for all types of students. As we're building courses for students across the state, we don't know the types of students that might be interacting with our courses. But what we do know is that a lot of our courses, as Darlene mentioned, the students that are working in them are going to be working on their own. And we want to design those courses in a way that promotes learner agency. We want those students, as they're working independently, to be able to make those choices, those active choices to learn and to help themselves learn. And so, what we're doing is when we're building those courses, we're putting those items into place not only in the design process, but also in the content itself as well. So we're going to talk from a high level what that means, but then we're going to get into practical examples and show some from our courses. So if you'll go to the next slide, Pam. So let's talk about a little bit about what learner agency looks like from a high level. So if you think about how every student learns, well, they learn differently, right? They process information differently. Some may prefer text, others may benefit from visuals or audio. And so in our design, we offer varied multimedia approaches. When just even if you think about vocabulary, even we offer the text version of vocabulary. We offer flashcards for vocabulary. We offer audio files. We offer images for vocabulary. So just with that one piece of the content in itself, we offer multiple ways to learn the vocabulary. And sometimes it might even be offered in context, right? So it might be offered in action. So you might see a vocabulary word in a video in action. So we know that in our design, we have to offer these multimedia approaches so that critical content is accessible regardless of the learning preferences. We also know that not every learner stays engaged or demonstrates their understanding in the same way. So, to address this, we provide and deliver content in different formats. But we have to keep the design consistent, ensuring that every student can focus on the core message without getting overwhelmed by format changes. We also ensure that students have varied ways to demonstrate mastery. Some might excel through written work, digital projects, or interactive discussions. So, by allowing choice, we empower students to select the method that resonates best with them. And we give every learner the opportunity to succeed in a way that aligns with their strengths. And so we're going to show some screenshots from our courses over the next couple of slides and we're going to try to talk through these to show some of the different ways that we have applied these different ways, different applications of UDL.
Thank you, Jen. So I'm going to go ahead and start with multiple means of representation. So when we think about learner agency and we think about the multiple means of representation, as Jen mentioned, learners process information differently. So even I would say among our panel here with Pam and Christine and Jen and myself, we all probably learn something in a different way. One of us might prefer a video. I know me, I'm a words person. So like a list of step-by-step directions will do it well for me. But somebody else might need something that is a little bit more visual or even some auditory. Maybe somebody would learn well from a podcast. So we want to think about our learners' experience as well, that they're going to process information differently. So giving them the opportunity to see it, to read it, to hear it if needed, and then to do it also. So learners like to, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit more with engagement, but learners also like to interact with the course in a different way. And so, for example, in the first one, which comes from our middle school success course, they have a video that provides an overview, but they can also follow along with the closed caption, but they also have inline text as well. So this is for a middle school course. So we give the students the opportunity to see, to hear, but also to read along so they can understand what the core concepts are. In the next example, which is also from a middle school Success 101 course, we talk to students about SMART goals. So there is the opportunity to read a little bit, and you could see at the very top, this kind of goes also along with engagement. There's multiple tabs, so they can kind of click and navigate, and it is HTML5 compliant. So what that means is if they're using an assistive device, it will help them with that navigation and read it in the appropriate order and give them those cues to move along. But they also have, this is from an H5P tool, which we use. Somebody had asked about Articulate and Storyline, which we have used in the past, but now we're using H5P as a lesson authoring support. And this provides an image of a SMART goal representing SMART goals. It does include the alternative text, but it also has a clear caption that a sighted learner can also interact with. And so students can also move through this in order. So again, they have that multiple means of representation where they're working with different types of media in order to learn the information, since they may process that information differently. In the next slide, we'll show you an example of multiple means of engagement. So all of these images that you see here that are presented do come from our middle school getting started unit. But they're representative of the types of tools that students might engage with in an NCVPS course. For example, in the first one, which represents the opening start here of our middle school getting started unit, you'll notice that there's an accordion of information. So this can, again, give them that a little bit of that interaction, but also list and help them visualize and engage with the material. So in the next center image are pictures of two different videos. So the videos both do have closed caption, but they also include, just short clips so that students can engage with the information. And so they actually have a little bit of a scenario. So it's our middle school getting started unit almost works like an escape room where they're given a scenario and they have to solve different clues as they move through the getting started unit to help them again interact. So considering their cognitive load, that a lot of middle schoolers, they may not necessarily have the attention span to sit through an hour-long video or through 10 pages of text. It gives them a way to engage and gives them something to do as they're learning. Again, also thinking about accessibility principles and making sure that it has those captions and that students can also start and stop the video as needed. And in the last example, this is also from our Getting Started unit. This gives you an example of some of the presentation tools we might use. We do build a lot of content directly in Canvas, as shown in the first image where they have an accordion to advance. But in the far right example, we show a lesson on the basics of working in an online course. And so they would navigate through this H5P presentation, comparable to how they might work through a Google slide deck or maybe even a PowerPoint presentation. And then at the very end, they would have a little quick assessment for them to move on. And then they would check their knowledge in a branching scenario in H5P. So again, this gives them those interactive elements to engage, but also provides those HTML compliant features so that it can be accessible for students as well. And then in the next slide, next two slides, Jennifer's going to talk to you about multiple means of action and expression.
Thank you, Darlene. And this again comes from our middle school success course. And that first image on the left is where we're teaching our students multiple note-taking methods, because not all students may know, first off, know how to take notes very well. This is geared towards students in sixth through eighth grade. So not only is it first teaching them the benefits of why they need to know how to take notes, and how that's going to help them moving forward, not only in middle school, but especially in high school and beyond, but is also showing them the different ways that they can take notes. We all know that there are different ways to take notes and that we all may like a different way better. Even within, as Darlene mentioned before, within just the presenters ourselves, we all may have different ways that we prefer to take notes. And so you have to find the way that works for you. And so you might notice that there's a tabbed interaction there on the left-hand side. I believe, Darlene, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was set up using City Labs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that was set up using City Labs there. So again, that's having the student take some action there, and so that they're having to click through the tabs themselves. But again, they're learning different methods, and then they are using those methods throughout the course, and they're getting to choose which method they like the best when they are presenting their understanding of how to take notes. So when they have to complete an assignment and they have to show that they have taken notes on a particular assignment, they get to choose which method that they have taken notes, and they get to present them that way. And on the left-hand side, when they are doing their module journal reflection, not only is that module, not only is that journal reflection their own personal reflection, but they also get to present that in their own interpretation way as well. Um, so they're setting their own SMART goal for themselves, again, promoting that learner agency both in the content itself, but again, helping the student click through the content to stay engaged. And as Darlene mentioned, all of this is keyboard accessible. So if you'll go to the next slide, these are two assignments as well where they get to, the student is creating content where they can, the content itself is very individualized to the student, and they also get to present the content in a way that works best for them. So they may choose to do an infographic. They may choose to do a presentation. So that could be a slideshow. And even with the slideshow, they can use a multitude of tools. So they're not pigeonholed into one particular product. Maybe they'd like to write. So maybe they can write a journal entry, and they have to have prescribed elements that are included. Maybe they prefer to do a video reflection, or maybe they want to do a mind map. And so they have all of these types of things that they can create. But the great thing about it is they have a rubric to follow. And within that rubric, they can make sure that they have included all the criteria, no matter what way they interpret and what way they present their content. And so they have that choice in how they present and show their mastery. And on the right-hand side, this is where they are going to present their final portfolio. And their portfolio will contain all of their journal entries and their mission statement and their final reflection. And again, they get to choose the format that works best for them. And again, all of these items will be judged against a rubric, which the students have beforehand. And so, again, they can look at the criterion that they're going to be evaluated against. And it's all the same criteria, no matter what format they choose to use. So the format does not matter. And so they get to not worry about that and focus on the content itself, and use the format that is their strength. and they can choose what they want to, how they want to express themselves. And you can move on to the next slide.
All right. Thank you, Jen. So I want to tie back to Christine's mention of cross-functional collaboration. And I think this also ties really well to Kadia's question. I'm not sure if I said your name correctly in the chat about, does this mean that every course content needs to be presented in all different formats? We strive really hard to include variety and include flexibility. And if we do get those just-in-time requests for IEPs or 504s, we have processes as a part of our cross function to ensure that we can work with students and schools depending on their needs. So sometimes it's just kind of starting small with what you can, striving for consistency, but also striving for that right balance of variety. And one way that we approach this in our curriculum staff is through cross-functional collaboration. So I wanted to show you essentially an organizational chart of how we organize our curriculum development team. So Jennifer, as our director of curriculum, oversees our entire curriculum development team. And so we have several full-time staff members, our curriculum coordinators, and then we have our full-time instructional designers. So that's myself and Brandy Thurman. And so we have distinct roles to help with this cross-functional course design process. Our coordinators work really closely with they're actually teachers among us, but they have a designated leadership role as curriculum instructional leaders. And so they have usually developed courses with us before. They understand course design principles. They also understand UDL. They more likely have done at least the Applying the Quality Matters rubric training. We've also provided some in-house training for them so they can understand our design principles. And so they will work closely with our curriculum coordinators and a quality assurance editor who is a subject matter expert to make sure that the content that we're designing is written according to UDL, is written according to standards, because we want to make sure that the courses align since we follow DPI's standards or AP College Board standards, as well as Quality Matters. And then once the course is approved and it's of high quality, it will then go to instructional design. Actually, we're in consistent loops with instructional design because our curriculum ILs will work closely with content generators who are also subject matter experts and assessment generators to make sure that the course is of high quality. So then again, we have those feedback loops, which I'll also talk about in the next slide, to ensure that as content's coming out and in Canvas, it is high quality. So maintaining those active feedback loops is important. And I believe Jen is going to talk to you a little bit about what we do to maintain those loops and what sort of tools and technologies we use.
Absolutely. So as you can see on the screen that it's a continuous process, correct? So accessibility is not something that's one and done. You have to have these active feedback loops. And so we do that through incorporating a portion of our course development training has digital accessibility in it. So we are constantly making sure that that is updated and that anybody who goes through our training has had some training on digital accessibility, and that is always updated to make sure that it matches our tools and anything that needs to be updated because of those recent updates, maybe for tools that have been changed in our processes or anything that reflects new laws or anything like that. We also have a robust course review process that's both internal and external. As I mentioned earlier, we do send our courses through QM peer reviews, but we also do have an internal course review process that we go through before we send it external review. We also use multiple tools within, like for as part of our internal review before we ever send anything external. And you can see those listed on the screen. And if you have any questions about those, we might have some time during the question section. Darlene uses quite a few of these with her instructional designers. We use Grackle within all of our Google Docs. We use UDoIt within Canvas. We currently use Yuja as our video streaming service, and it does captions and audio descriptions. And then we're using some AI tools. Murph AI, we use that a lot for audio, especially for our world language courses that we worked on quite a bit last year. And we're using some AI tools to help with digital accessibility as well when we need some of those just-in-time request help. So especially we've been using Gemini since we are a Google Suites campus.
Uh, so thank you, Jen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the accessibility in our development training. So this was mentioned that by when people start working as generators for us or quality assurance reviewers with us or our curriculum ILs, we want to provide them with adequate accessibility training. And we really want to be able to kind of touch on the basics so that they can actionize it as they're working. So what we have, this is in our Canvas course, this is our course development training. So we have a lesson that focuses on the digital accessibility and federal requirements. And so we have several scenarios of students and profiles to give them an idea of the types of students that might be taking their courses and what would happen if a course was not accessible and what that experience would be like for a learner. So then we show them how, if we properly format text, if we make sure that our hyperlinks clearly identify the item that is being linked, if we provide uh, alternative text, or if we provide long description, if we make sure our tables are accessible, if we make sure that our presentations are accessible and that our video and audio have captions, we show them what the impact will be on the student learning when they apply those things. And because we're cross-functional, we want to make sure that our content generators, that our subject matter experts understand what role they play in accessibility. Because while our instructional design team and our instructional technology specialists know more about the technical side of making sure that a caption or alternative text is applied or how to apply closed captions to a video, really we often rely on our subject matter experts to provide the accuracy and the information so that can truly work with the instruction. So we talk to them about what their responsibilities are. So essentially, if they furnish us with an instructional image, they should ultimately give us that alternative text or long description where needed. They also need to verify the accuracy of transcripts and captions. We have stronger tools than ever to help us with that, but sometimes there might be an instance where, like a world language course, like I don't speak Arabic. I don't believe Jen speaks Arabic last time I checked, or Chinese or Japanese. So we rely on our subject matter experts to verify the accuracy or to help us if we have a multilingual caption. We also uh, tell them to avoid things like text on images. So, and if you are going to use it like in the form of an infographic, to make sure that you have that long description. To also be selective when you request tables. Some teachers, they like tables. It's a good way to show organized information. But unless it's data driven or tabular information, we really try to sway them away from tables. And where needed, we use the sort of tools like City Labs, for example, to help us convert a table to more of a column format. So it has that visual layout that they might be looking for, but again, it's fully accessible. And probably most importantly, again, kind of thinking about really accessibility in UDL by design, we really work with them to consider the instructional intent of everything they're using. So as you think about how to provide alt text, how to provide those right supports, the question to ask is, why do I want to use this in the first place? How does it benefit learning? And that can provide the appropriate alternative text or the appropriate accessibility guidance so that they can furnish with us what we need. And so this brings us to the end of our presentation. And we just want to kind of end with a short little word of appreciation a word from our sponsors, so to speak. So we appreciate Dr. Fox and her UDL principles. We also appreciate Pam mentioning the QM 6th edition rubric, particularly General Standard 8. And we also want to give a shout out to Canva for helping us with some of the slide generation and then some of the Microsoft Suite slides as well. So thank you. And I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to our facilitators for some Q&A.
Yeah,
All
there are a
right.
few questions in the chat. Pam, do you want to facilitate those? Or
Well, if you've been keeping track of them, I haven't really because I've been sharing my screen. So,
Yeah, there were a couple, many instructors tend to feel so overwhelmed with this because it feels like they're recreating the course three plus times over and over again to meet all the different learning experiences and learning preferences for students. Have you found the use of Gen AI services making this process more efficient for instructors, such as using Gen AI to create visuals, audio podcasts, other things, etc.? I don't know who I'm tossing that out to.
I was waiting on
Maybe,
long pause, but I
yeah.
can start with this. Generative AI has really helped us a lot with digital accessibility. And as Jen mentioned in her presentation, we've been using, we are part of, we have Google Suite with NCVPS, and we have Gemini as a part of our teachers have it, our full-time staff has it, anybody with an NCVPS domain has it. And we have found it to be very, very helpful. One easy win I have found with it is it's really helped a lot with long description for visuals that we get in the world language because it can recognize both languages. So I'm sure if your organization is Microsoft, for example, I think that Copilot has a lot of similar technologies as well. So depending on what you have available, depending on what you do at your organization, if you're in that instructional design role, test it out and try it out because I do feel like that has been an easy win for us. And I also love Notebook LM to help with if you have resources. For example, if you've just pulled in a page from your learning management system, like I use it a lot with Canvas, like a fully designed page, I will print it out as vanilla HTML. So basically, it's just clear. It kind of eliminates some of the different tabs and interactions. And Notebook LM has been really great to help me with either providing a visual or maybe even kind of helping with some of those supports for students, like a set of guided notes, or even something that's a little more simplified for learning. So definitely test out the generative AI tools depending on your organization. But I feel like they get stronger over time, and the more that you engage with them and learn to ask for what you want, the really the better the output you're going to get.
And to extend on Notebook LM, you mentioned audio, so it can create a summary of, like if you take that HTML, that PDF, whatever you put into summary of your Canvas page, it can also create a summary of it, but it also can create a podcast of it as well.
Yeah, I've just so I was going to mention Notebook LM in the podcast. So really powerful. As was also mentioned, the AI features within the software that you're using are increasingly getting better. Even the auto, you always have to check, but alt tags leveraging for the long descriptions, which are can be very time consuming. Again, must cross-reference because you're never quite sure. And there was one other thing I was going to say. It escaped me at the moment. And I do love the fact that I was referred to as Dr. Fox, but for all of you who have put in the work for your PhDs, I don't want to claim that because I don't have mine. But that's awesome for sharing. I think the other thing that folks don't always think about is the embedded features in the devices, right? For giving those options. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention was simplified language. When you're looking to simplify language in content, right? So if you're teaching 10th graders American history, but you realize that the curriculum that you have may be super challenging based on reading levels. It's another place where educators are um, using generative AI, but again, another place to be cautious and review versus simply post. Those are great learning opportunities, right? To also share with the students as you're learning and working with AI.
Another question here. This is on multimodal. This is all excellent. I appreciate the examples of what this looks like in practice. However, I'm curious about how this happens in process. How much time is permitted for building a course? Do you work with instructional designers, or is this all faculty led? Do you have training requirements before courses are built and taught? I know you answered some of that in your uh, in your talk, Darlene, but I don't know if there's anything extra you want to add too, or maybe Pam.
Yes, we actually we're a K-12 organization, so we build all of our content for our instructors. So we um, and then we hand the content to the instructors to teach. So the teachers do not build their own content. And we use instructors. We hire instructors to work as the subject matter experts, and we use instructional designers to design it inside of Canvas. And
Yeah, and
yes,
I
it takes time.
exactly. And I think the part about the time, like it really depends on your team and how robust it is and how much skills they have and what great training they have. Because we did Susie Scheffler and I did a build or buy considerations at the DLAC conference for several years in a row. And that question always comes up and the answer is it depends. But we're excited to hear about how AI is, being utilized to kind of speed up some of those processes. But, another caution about using AI is build accessibility and UDL into your prompts to create that AI content, because it's so hard to retrofit things later, and it's much easier to do it from the get-go.
Maybe because we're talking about tools, and Jennifer just threw this into the chat. Not to be a downer, but any suggestions on where or how to find funding to afford any of these tools and that you've been talking about? Their example, they'd love to have something like City Labs, but it's beyond many budgets. So I don't know if we get this question a lot. Don't always have an answer.
Yeah, putting my ed tech hat on, which is the world I came from, I would say uh, some sometimes, yes, there is a digital divide and there are different budgets. Consortia pricing is typically better than if an individual school or district may be purchasing on their own. So perhaps looking at your education service agencies or depending how you're coordinated as a virtual program is one option. And then always asking too. Like sometimes you just have to ask, right? I have to buy a car right now, the worst. So you have to ask. I'm not saying it's like anything magic, but there are some of these tools are embedded and free, right? And then others do have direct costs, but trying to figure out a model or a pilot so you can then see is investing in this then saving so much staff time that you can substantiate that and you ask for a pilot for a couple individuals. Just small things like that is worth trying.
So I saw that there was a question about equality in assessment, and that reminded me of a question in course reviews that comes up a lot. Um, we can't put alt text on this image in a quiz because it'll give away the answer. I would love to hear your responses to that one.
So I have not had someone ask me that directly. Typically, the questions we get are about our assessments and students not being able to use their screen readers or other tools that they use, during regular instruction. Um, I think that it really depends on, the state you're in, the requirements that there are of how I think folks are getting, not that everything's changing, but they're starting to understand this a little bit more. And on the last call I was on right before this with some of the sites districts, they were talking about giving assessments to students without the accommodations that were technically required, and then again with the accommodations, just to be able to show this, even alone the student, what they do know and understand, or the families, and be able to substantiate and advocate, at higher levels. But I know a lot of this may be outside of your privy. I will tell you that we have the luxury right now of working with four fairly large organizations on assessment through a philanthropic grant on developing accessible assessments. So stay tuned on that. We have about a year to work on that project. So there is an interest, I think, in these groups and how to change how they're developing assessments.
Well, and I always say too that the way that you describe the image that the eye can see, um, if the eye can see it, um, and that is the answer, then then that's the answer, so you're describing what exactly. I think someone put it in the chat. It's communicating the um the visual description of it, not the content, right? So if it's a line that crosses at 5, then that's what you say, that the line crosses at 5. You don't say that the x-intercept or the y-intercept is 5, right? So the student has to understand that that's what that means. Um, and so that's how you describe it. You describe what you're seeing, um, just as someone that, you know, without sight issues would be able to see it.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, so that might be the last that we can take in this. But I want to thank Christine from Cast and Pam and Susie from Quality Matters and Darlene and Jennifer from North Carolina Virtual Public Schools for presenting today. And thank you guys very much. We will be sending out the recording of this and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
You.